With more, we are now joined by two journalists who are covering the commission. Tonda MacCharles is parliamentary reporter for the Toronto Star. Christopher Nardi is parliamentary reporter for the National Post. Hello to the two of you.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michael.
Listen, Tonda, I'm going to begin with you because at the time of the protest, we were pointing out that there were many people with different intentions coming to the Hill to join what was happening, and we seem to get a real sense of that today. Talk to us about the testimony that we heard from Chris Barber.
Well, we've actually heard from two different people who've come from two different groups, both of whom are essentially arguing that this was not a monolithic protest, that there were different groups, competing factions, competing goals. Chris Barber, the trucker from Saskatchewan who came, was one of the early arrivals, said essentially that, look, he was yes, he touched base and organized to come with a bunch of these people, but didn't agree with the goal of, as stated by a memorandum by the Canada Unity faction, that they wanted to overthrow the government. Barber said it was all about anti-trucker mandates for him. He wanted the vaccine mandates lifted for cross-border truckers, and that's all it was about. But we got a picture of internally what the chaos was in the streets in terms of, the disorganization amongst everybody. And I think also, though, you also saw them both, Chris Barber and the later witness, Steve Charland, who testified this afternoon, that they're portraying it also as all about peace and love and harmony and how there was no violence and there was no threat and everything like that, downplaying the concerns that the police have expressed in this inquiry to date. So yes, there was a perception of different agendas and different goals on the police and intelligence side of things, but also within the convoy movement itself, different goals, competing agendas, and a split even between, they basically disagreed that they had anything to do with each other in terms of organizing the Windsor protest, the Coutts Alberta protest, the Emerson protest. They basically disassociated themselves, saying those were organic movements that sprang up as well.
Mm-hmm. So Christopher, what do you make of it then? Because as Tonda was saying, here we have two competing groups who say that they came separately, they had different objectives, none of which apparently was meant to incite any type of violence. What do you make of what you heard from the two today so far?
Well, you get the sense that you're almost listening to descriptions today of completely different and unrelated events to what we've heard from police testimony, from City of Ottawa testimony, and even from the residents of Ottawa testimony that we heard on day one of the commission, right? Tonda said it well, we've heard today of peace and love, and we were here to protest mandates. There was no violence. Steve Charland said he saw no intimidation, no harassment, no violence. In fact, he blamed the violence on police squarely only. Barber said we're coming down here and we tried to enforce this peacefulness, that we did nothing wrong. We didn't even know that the demonstration was illegal, he said. Whereas for the last week or so, we've heard a ton of descriptions from intelligence reports, from the OPP, from the Ottawa Police Service, from former police chief, Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly, that this was a dangerous kind of assaultive, was I think the word that Peter Slowly used, environment where there was constant harassment, there was constant intimidation, where people did not feel safe being in the streets of their own city, right? So we're actually kind of getting this completely different perspective from the convoy organizers that does not, let's say, lie. There's really no way to reconcile it with what we've heard in the last few weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how the protest organizers today, but also in the next few days as we hear more of them, explain their perspective, right? And kind of demonstrate it, because we've seen the proof of how it was disruptive at the time. Now we need to see how they consider that it went down so well and how they are the victims of police and political overreaction.
Well, absolutely. There seems to be this disconnect between the earlier testimony we heard at the very start of this inquiry versus what we've been hearing today. And it was also, I guess interesting is the word here, in the way Barber distanced himself when he was asked about a death threat made against the Deputy Prime Minister. Tonda, can you shed some light on that exchange, exactly who made the threat, why it was raised in the commission today?
It came up in the context of the convoy organizers themselves were putting out what they called their own intelligence reports on what was happening, updates to participants in the protest of what was going on, a scan of both the media and the environment and the cops and everything they knew. And in that, there was one of the government lawyers put to Chris Barber, the idea that, look, some of these pamphlets, these updates, were pumping up conspiracy theories about Chrystia Freeland being connected with a globalist conspiracy at the World Economic Forum. And Barbara was at that point, attempting to say, look, it was all peace and love, peaceful demonstration, no violence. And the government lawyer points out, well, look, the very day that you guys put out this update to your participants and and convoy supporters, Chrystia Freeland actually got quite a graphic death threat against her, a threat by email directly to her that, within days she was going to get a bullet put in her head. And very violent threat against the Deputy Prime Minister. Barbara said he had no idea of that. That was the first he heard of it. He distanced himself from any of the rhetoric that others might have used. He distanced himself from the goals of some of his fellow convoyers. And yet the Government of Canada lawyer was attempting to say, look, you might say that you weren't supportive of that, but if you fan the flames, don't you admit you have no control over the other participants? And Barbara was forced to admit, yes, they didn't really have control. He tried to keep emergency lanes open in this protest. He failed. I think, the government and the inquiry lawyers are trying to draw out that no matter what their claims, the fact of the matter was they had no control over the various factions. And that became, I think, an issue for the government as they weighed what needed to be done to control this thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is, of course, just one piece, today's testimony of what's meant to happen this week. So I want to talk about significance now. And Tonda, I'll stay with you right now about the significance of this week's testimony, who you're actually watching out for, because really this is just the start.
Yeah, it's the start. We'll hear from a total of 3 witnesses today, but look, the whole week is expected to be spent on various individuals who are leading the protest. The significance is this. Well, not only is it a huge contrast from the legalese and the police jargon that we've heard to date, it also sets the scene for what was in the mind of the provincial officials and the federal officials when it came to weighing what legislative tools they had to deal with the blockades. I think what you're hearing today and all this week will be a picture from inside the convoy, which stands in stark contrast to the picture we've been given, not just in testimony today, but also in documents. And the documents are very telling. We're getting a look inside this whole scene that we really didn't have. And, I continue to sort of be surprised and amazed the extent to which there were concerns and fears around this and attempts to document what exactly was going on and who was involved.
Mm-hmm. Christopher, what would you say in terms of significance and who you might be watching out for this week?
Well, I'll be looking forward to seeing another convoy organizer, Tamara Litch, who will be coming up in the next few days. We know amongst many responsibilities that she had, she was the one who received that first $1 million, basically check from the fundraisers that they had, the crowdfunding fundraisers. We'll find out a little bit more probably about the financial aspect behind the convoy and possibly where that money came from, right? We've heard a lot of allegations of foreign interference, foreign funding, notably from the United States, and possibly, eventually we'll find out what intelligence services thought about that, but hopefully she'll be able to shed some light on where that money came from, what happened to it, where it went, and how it was distributed ultimately, right? And then the thing that I'll be looking forward to is just understanding what was going on within the protesters when there were negotiations going on with police to clear out parts of downtown Ottawa, right? We've heard that police were kind of tearing themselves up, amongst themselves on how much they should negotiate with the groups that were here on Coventry Road, on Wellington Street, and in the neighborhoods of downtown Ottawa. We'll find out, how did those negotiations go? Why did they seem to fall through? Were they able to even get everyone, all the truckers on board? It doesn't sound like it. There was that group, the Farfadas, that Steve Charland leads, that wanted nothing to do, for example, with negotiations, is what we've heard. So we'll get a better sense of how organized or disorganized they were internally to the point that, were negotiations with police even feasible, or was that basically, a dead end from the start for police and ultimately just, let's say, an unnecessary delay in ending the blockades here in Ottawa?
Well, from the very start, we heard Justice Rouleau said there was a lot of information to get through in a short amount of time. So to help put today's testimony in context, thank you to the two of you. Really appreciate the time. That is Tonda MacCharles and Christopher Nardi.